is Daniel Cross, broadcasting from the KMTN radio tower in Millbrook, Oregon. If you're hearing this, then you're still in a place the forests haven't reached yet. Still in a pocket of concrete and steel that hasn't been swallowed by green. Still breathing air that doesn't taste like pollen and decay, and the sweet rot of composting civilization. I'm a radio host, or I was before the world started dying. Now I'm just a voice in the dark, trying to warn you about what's coming. Trying to tell you that the trees are moving, the forests are marching, and there's nowhere left to run that they won't eventually find. It's been 67 days since the first tree walked. 67 days since we realized the planet had decided it was done with us. 67 days since everything we thought we knew about the natural order revealed itself to be a comfortable lie we'd been telling ourselves since we climbed down from the trees and started cutting them down. And I need to tell you everything, because someone needs to understand what happened. Someone needs to know how humanity lost a war we didn't even know we were fighting until it was already over. My name is Daniel Cross. I'm 42 years old. I've been a radio DJ in Millbrook for 15 years, hosting the morning show, playing classic rock, taking calls about traffic and weather and which local restaurant made the best breakfast burrito. It was a good life. Simple, predictable, safe. I had a house on Maple Street with a yard I never mowed often enough. A fact my neighbors reminded me of with polite, passive-aggressive comments about property values. Had a golden retriever named Copper who was getting old, his muzzle gray, his movements slower, but who still greeted me like I'd been gone for years every time I came home from the station. Had an ex-wife named Sarah who I still loved, even though we'd been divorced for 3 years. The divorce wasn't dramatic. No affairs. No screaming matches. Just the slow realization that we'd become different people than the ones who'd gotten married at 23. She wanted adventure, wanted to travel, wanted to see the world beyond Millbrook. I wanted stability, wanted routine, wanted to wake up in the same place every morning and know exactly what my day would look like. Eventually, love wasn't enough to bridge that gap. We'd split amicably, stayed friends, still had dinner once a month to talk about our daughter. Lily, my daughter. 17 years old, senior in high school, with her mother's sharp wit and my stubborn streak, and her own unique ability to make me feel simultaneously like the most important person in her world and completely irrelevant to her life. She was applying to colleges, wanted to study environmental science, which I'd found ironically perfect given what was about to happen. She spent her weekends volunteering at a local nature preserve, educating kids about forest ecosystems, about how trees communicate through fungal networks, about the hidden complexity of systems we barely understood. She tried to tell me once, about 6 months before everything changed, about how forests were more intelligent than we gave them credit for, how they weren't just collections of individual trees, but interconnected superorganisms, how a mother tree could recognize its own offspring and send them nutrients through underground networks, how forests could defend themselves, warn each other about threats, adapt to dangers. I'd smiled and nodded and told her that was fascinating, but I hadn't really listened, hadn't really understood, thought it was just my daughter being passionate about her interests, not my daughter trying to warn me about what was sleeping beneath our feet. I should have listened. That was my life. That was the world. Morning show from 6 to 10 a.m., 5 days a week, playing Springsteen and Petty and Fleetwood Mac, taking calls from regulars like old Joe who phoned in every Tuesday to complain about the town council, or Betty from the diner who shared recipes, Or Trevor, the high school football coach, who gave score updates. Small town radio, the heartbeat of a community. I'd been doing it so long I could run the board half asleep, could banter with callers on autopilot, could fill dead air with the same comfortable patter I'd been using for years. And it all ended on March 19th when old Jack started walking. Old Jack was a Douglas fir on the edge of Millbrook Park, maybe 300 years old according to local estimates. Massive trunk, had to be 12 feet in diameter at the base. Branches that spread like arms reaching for the sky, creating a canopy so thick that almost nothing grew beneath it. Local landmark. The kind of tree that had been there so long it felt permanent, eternal, like it had always existed and always would. People proposed under that tree. Kids climbed it despite the no climbing signs the Park Service kept posting. Couples carved their initials into the bark, adding to layers and layers of declarations from previous generations. If Millbrook had a founding father, it was old Jack. On March 19th, at approximately 3:47 a.m., according to the timestamp on the security footage, old Jack pulled its roots from the ground and walked into downtown Millbrook. I wasn't there when it happened. I was at the station, doing prep work for the morning show, going through newswire stories and weather reports, picking music, drinking my fourth cup of coffee, and trying to convince myself I wasn't too old for this job. The station was empty, except for me. Our night shift DJ had signed off at midnight, and the early morning was my quiet time. Time to think. Time to prepare. Time to remember why I loved this job, despite the early hours and mediocre pay. The calls started coming in around 4 a.m. The emergency line first. We maintained a line for breaking news, disasters, anything that needed immediate public attention. Usually, it was silent. That morning, it lit up like Christmas. First call was from Janet Morrison, night shift supervisor at the 24-hour diner on Main Street. She was breathless, words tumbling over each other, making no sense. Said there was a tree in the street, a big tree, moving, walking. I thought she was drunk or having a stroke or playing a prank. Then came a call from Officer Mike Brennan, Millbrook PD, 15-year veteran, level-headed guy, not prone to exaggeration. He said, "Daniel, I know this sounds insane, but I need you to put out an alert. There's a large tree moving down Main Street. Douglas fir, it's walking. Roots are pulling it along. It's real. This is real." I'm looking at it right now. I asked if he'd been drinking. He said he wished he had been. Said he was watching a 300-year-old tree move down the center of Main Street at approximately 2 miles an hour, roots churning up the pavement, branches scraping against storefronts. Said he'd called it in. Said dispatch thought he was joking, but he needed me to get the word out because people needed to get off the streets. Then my producer Katie Marsh called. She'd been monitoring emergency frequencies from home, something she did obsessively, always wanting to stay ahead of any news. Katie was 26, had grown up in Millbrook, knew everyone and everything about this town. She'd started as an intern at the station 5 years ago and proved herself indispensable within weeks, better with technology than I'd ever be. Could edit audio in half the time it took me. Could manage our social media presence, our streaming feeds, our website. Could do in minutes what took me hours. Katie said, "Daniel, get to your computer. Pull up the traffic cam feed, Main and 3rd. You need to see this." I pulled it up. Took maybe 30 seconds for the feed to load. Ancient computer struggling with the bandwidth. And then I was watching a 300-year-old Douglas fir, old Jack, walking down the center of Main Street. walking, not being moved, not falling, walking, with purpose, with intention. Its roots had pulled free from the earth, massive structures that had to be 30 feet deep, now exposed and dragging behind the trunk, like tentacles or legs or something between the two. They moved in a coordinated way, pulling and pushing, propelling the tree forward. Not fast, maybe 2 miles an hour, but steady, relentless. The kind of movement that said nothing was going to stop it. The trunk swayed as it moved, finding balance, compensating for the uneven weight distribution. Branches scraped against buildings on both sides of the street, leaving marks in brick and siding. Glass cracked. Car alarms went off as the roots brushed against vehicles. Security lights triggered. Dogs started barking across the entire downtown area, that collective howl that happens when animals sense something fundamentally wrong with the world. And people were coming outside. I could see them in the camera feed. Residents in bathrobes and pajamas, stepping onto porches and sidewalks, staring at the impossible thing moving past their homes. Some were taking pictures with phones. Others were just frozen, unable to process what they were seeing. Katie and I watched in silence for maybe 5 minutes. Watched old Jack walk 6 blocks, moving from Millbrook Park through the downtown area toward the town square. Then it stopped. Right in the center of the square, in the open plaza where we held farmers' markets in summer and Christmas events in winter. And it planted itself, drove its roots deep into the concrete, cracking it, splitting it open, burrowing down until it was anchored again. And that's where it stayed, right in the center of town. Old Jack, transplanted from the park to the square, standing like a sentinel, like a declaration, like a flag planted by an invading army. Katie's voice came through my phone. What do we do? I didn't have an answer. Didn't know what you do when a tree decides to go for a walk. Didn't know if this was a disaster or a curiosity or the beginning of something worse. I said, we broadcast it, warn people to stay clear, get official statements, treat it like any other breaking news story, and figure out the rest as we go. By dawn, the whole town had gathered around old Jack. I went down there myself around 5:30 a.m., leaving Katie at the station to manage the phones and the feeds. Needed to see it in person. Needed to confirm my eyes weren't lying. The tree stood in the center of the square, roots buried in broken concrete, trunk rising toward the sky, branches spread wide. It looked normal, like it had always been there, like the square had been designed around it. Except for the trail of torn pavement leading back to the park, the evidence of its journey gouged into the street. You'd think it was just a tree, a beautiful, ancient, perfectly ordinary tree. Police had cordoned off the area with yellow tape, though no one seemed to know what they were protecting people from. The tree wasn't moving anymore, wasn't threatening, just existing in a place it shouldn't exist. Mayor Richard Paulson was there, looking like he'd been dragged from bed, which he probably had been. He was giving a statement to news crews from Portland, who'd made the hour drive when the story hit the wire, saying they were investigating, saying they had experts coming to examine the tree, saying residents should remain calm. But he looked scared. They all looked scared, because if a tree could walk 6 blocks and replant itself, what else could it do? I recorded some interviews, talked to witnesses who'd seen it move, talked to Janet from the diner who'd made the first call. She said, it didn't look natural, but it didn't look unnatural either. It just looked purposeful, like it knew exactly where it was going, like it had decided something and nothing was going to stop it. I talked to a botanist from the university, Dr. Ellen Reeves, who'd driven down as soon as she heard. She was examining the roots with a mixture of fascination and terror. She said, "This shouldn't be possible. Trees don't have motor control. They don't have muscles or neurons or any of the structures necessary for coordinated movement. But these roots moved in concert, lifted and pushed and pulled with perfect coordination. Either we've fundamentally misunderstood plant biology, or something else is controlling this tree." I asked what she meant by something else. She shook her head, said she didn't know, said she needed to take samples, run tests, get more data before she'd speculate. I broadcast about it on the morning show, started at 6 a.m. like always, played the usual intro music, gave the usual greeting. "Good morning, Millbrook. This is Daniel Cross, and you're listening to KMTN, your voice for the valley." Then I said, "And if you haven't heard yet, we've got something unusual to talk about this morning." I tried to keep my tone light, made jokes about trees getting tired of the park and wanting to see the city, played "Walkin' After Midnight" by Patsy Cline, took calls from listeners, all of whom wanted to talk about old Jack. Some thought it was a prank, elaborate hoax, special effects. Some thought it was a miracle, sign from God, nature's way of sending a message. Some thought it was aliens or government experiments or mass hallucination brought on by something in the water supply. No one thought it was what it actually was. The first move in a war humanity was about to lose. By March 21st, 2 days later, it was happening everywhere. Not just Millbrook, not just Oregon, everywhere. Trees were walking. Reports came in from across the Pacific Northwest first. A grove of redwoods in Northern California, ancient giants that had stood for thousands of years, had uprooted and moved 15 miles inland during the night. No one had seen them move. No one had heard them. But drone footage showed the trail they'd left. Massive furrows in the earth, crushed undergrowth, and a new grove standing where there had been clear meadow the day before. A stand of pines in Washington had marched through a suburban neighborhood outside Seattle. Homeowners woke up to find trees in their yards that hadn't been there the night before. Not saplings, mature pines. 50 feet tall, roots still dripping soil. Standing in flower beds and on driveways, and in one case right through the middle of a swimming pool, the concrete shattered, water draining into the earth. Ancient oaks in Portland had surrounded city blocks overnight, cutting off streets, trapping residents. The trees had positioned themselves with eerie precision, creating barriers that blocked roads but left sidewalks just barely passable. Like they understood human infrastructure. Like they knew exactly how to isolate populations. The news was covering it non-stop. Every channel, every station, every podcast and social media feed. Scientists were baffled. Botanists couldn't explain it. Some suggested underground seismic activity was literally moving trees, though that didn't explain the purposeful nature of the movements or why it was happening globally. Others proposed a fungal network, that mycelium connecting tree root systems had somehow become coordinated, allowing trees to move in unison. Religious leaders called it a sign of end times, divine judgment, the beginning of prophecies coming true. Environmental activists said it was nature's revenge for deforestation, for climate change, for centuries of abuse. No one had real answers. We just knew that trees all over the world were starting to move, and not randomly. They were moving toward human settlements, toward cities and towns and anywhere people had built structures. They were coming for us. I spent those first days glued to the station, broadcasting almost non-stop. Katie and I worked in shifts, one of us always on air, sharing information as fast as we could get it. We became a clearinghouse for reports from across the region. People would call in with sightings, with stories, with theories. We'd verify what we could and broadcast everything. And a pattern started to emerge. The trees weren't just moving randomly, they were advancing, coordinating. Different species moving at different speeds, but all heading in the same direction, toward us. On March 23rd, I got a call from Lily. She was crying, scared. Said she'd been reading about it online, following the reports, and she understood what was happening. Said she'd studied this. Said the forests were connected through mycorrhizal networks, underground fungal systems that linked tree roots together, allowing them to share nutrients and information. Said scientists had known for years that trees could communicate through these networks, warn each other about threats, share resources with offspring, respond to damage collectively. She said, "Dad, I think they've been planning this. The forests. They've been watching us cut them down, burn them, destroy them for centuries. And they've been communicating, sharing information about the threat, about us." And something triggered them. Something made them decide to act, to fight back. I asked her if she really believed trees could think, could make decisions, could plan. She said, individual trees? Maybe not. But the forests as a whole? As a collective consciousness distributed across millions of organisms? Dad, we've been treating them like decorations, like resources. But they're alive. They're connected. And they're aware. And I think they're done being passive. I didn't want to believe her. Wanted to think this was some natural phenomenon we'd figure out and fix. But watching trees walk and forests advance with clear purpose, it was getting harder to deny. I asked Lily if she was safe. She said she and Sarah were packing. Said they were heading to Sarah's sister's place in Arizona. Far from any major forests, far from the advancing green. Asked me to come with them. I told her I had to stay. Had to keep broadcasting. Had to be the voice that warned people what was coming. She said, "Dad, you can't save everyone by playing music and giving warnings. Please, just come with us. I need you. Mom needs you. We can figure this out together." I heard Sarah in the background, shouting that we were leaving in an hour with or without me, making the same argument we'd had 100 times during our marriage, that I cared more about my job than my family, that I was choosing the station over the people who actually mattered. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was being selfish, but I couldn't leave. This was what I did. This was who I was. The voice in the darkness. The person who stayed when others left. It was stupid and stubborn and probably suicidal. But it was the only thing that made sense to me. I told Lily I loved her. Told her to stay safe. Told her I'd find her when this was over. Told her I was sorry for not being the father she deserved. She said, "I love you too. Please don't die. Please, I can't lose you." That was March 26th. The last time I heard my daughter's voice. 71 days ago. I don't know if she made it to Arizona. Don't know if Arizona is even still accessible. Communications have been breaking down as cell towers get crushed by trees, as power grids fail, as infrastructure collapses under the advancing green. I think about that call every day. About how I chose the station over my family. About how I might have been able to save them if I'd gone. Or about how I might have just died with them, and at least we'd have been together at the end. I replay every word, every inflection, the sound of her crying, the desperation in her voice. I chose wrong. I know that now. But by the time I knew it, it was too late to change it. On March 25th, the movements became more aggressive. Trees weren't just relocating anymore. They were advancing, moving toward human settlements in coordinated waves, and they were bringing other plants with them. I watched from the radio tower as the forest east of Millbrook began to shift. The tower was on a hill outside town, 300 feet of metal scaffolding with the broadcast equipment at the top and a small equipment building at the base. Perfect vantage point to see the valley. Perfect position to watch the world end. You could see the forest moving if you looked carefully. The tree line creeping closer. 50 feet a day at first, then 100, then more. And it wasn't just the big trees. The underbrush was moving too. Ferns and bushes and brambles and everything that had roots. All of it flowing like a green tide, like water seeking its level, consuming everything in its path. The roads into Millbrook started getting blocked, not by fallen trees, but by roots. We'd get reports from people trying to leave town, trying to evacuate, finding the highway impassable. Thick networks of roots would break through the pavement overnight, making roads look like they'd been bombed. Cars would try to drive over them and get stuck, axles caught, wheels trapped. And then the trees would come, would march down the ruined highways in lines, like soldiers advancing on a battlefield, like an army that never got tired and never stopped and never retreated. People tried to stop them, tried to cut them down, burn them, use every tool at our disposal to fight back. The lumber mill on the edge of town mobilized its workers, sent crews out with chainsaws and heavy equipment. They'd cut down advancing trees, clear sections of forest, create fire breaks. It worked for maybe a day. Then the trees started fighting back. I got a call from Roger Hendricks, foreman at the mill. His voice was shaking. Said they'd been cutting down a line of advancing Douglas firs when one of the trees reacted. His chainsaw bit into the bark, and the tree's roots lashed out, wrapping around his legs, pulling him down. His crew tried to help, tried to cut the roots away, but they were strong. Thick as fire hoses, moving with purpose. Roger said it felt like the tree knew what he was trying to do, like it understood the threat and responded. They got him free eventually, broke the roots with axes and brute force. But 3 of his crew weren't so lucky. Got pulled into the advancing forest, wrapped in roots and dragged under the undergrowth. Roger's crew tried to dig them out, but the earth itself seemed to fight them. Roots from dozens of trees converging, working together, pulling the men deeper. They found one body 3 days later, or what was left of it. The man had been absorbed. That's the only word for it. Roots had grown through him. Fungal growths covered his skin. He'd been integrated into the forest floor, becoming part of the network. Still recognizable as human, but also clearly something else now. Part of the ecosystem. Food for the soil. After that, people stopped trying to fight. What was the point? You could cut down trees and they'd just be replaced. You could burn sections of forest, and the flames would spread to homes and buildings. Fighting back only made things worse. The forest was patient, could afford to lose individual trees, could sacrifice pieces of itself to advance the whole. We couldn't afford to lose anything. Every loss was permanent, every death irreplaceable. By March 28th, Millbrook was under siege. The forest had advanced to the town's edge, a wall of green surrounding us on 3 sides. The only clear direction was west, toward the coast, down the valley and away from the mountains where the densest forests lived. People were evacuating, packing cars with whatever they could carry, family photos and important documents and supplies, leaving behind houses and businesses and memories. Streaming down Highway 22 toward the coast, hoping that somehow water would stop what was coming, hoping that the ocean would be a barrier the forests couldn't cross. I stayed at the radio tower, kept broadcasting, because someone needed to. Someone needed to be the voice that kept people informed, that warned other towns what was coming, that maintained some thread of normalcy in a world that had stopped making sense. Katie stayed with me. I told her a dozen times to leave, said she should go with her family, get to safety while she still could. Her parents had evacuated on March 27th, heading south toward California, begging her to come. She'd refused, said the station needed her, said I needed her, said someone had to keep me from playing nothing but Springsteen during the apocalypse and spiraling into depression. That was Katie. Humor in the face of horror. Loyalty that made no logical sense but meant everything to me. On March 30th, the forests reached downtown Millbrook. I watched from the tower through binoculars as trees walked down Main Street, roots tearing up the pavement that had only recently been repaired from Old Jack's journey. They moved in formation, coordinated. Like they'd planned this. Like they'd been waiting for Old Jack to scout the route, and now they were following. Where trees went, other plants followed. Vines climbed up storefronts, green tendrils reaching into broken windows, finding their way into buildings like water-seeking cracks. Moss covered brick and wood and metal, turning everything soft and green. Grass broke through sidewalks, sprouting in perfect lines along cracks in the concrete. Flowers bloomed in impossible abundance, filling the air with scent that was beautiful and terrible, like walking through a funeral home. The town was being consumed, swallowed by green, transformed from a human settlement into something else, something older. Something that had existed long before we built our stores and houses and paved our streets. People who'd stayed behind tried to fight, tried to defend their homes and businesses and lives. But you can't fight a forest, can't reason with it, can't negotiate or compromise or appeal to mercy it doesn't have. It just keeps coming, implacable and patient, and eventually it takes everything. I watched Tim Morrison try to save his hardware store. Tim had owned that place for 30 years, knew every item on every shelf, took pride in being the guy who always had exactly what you needed. He set up a propane torch, tried to burn a defensive line around his building, tried to create a barrier the plants couldn't cross. The fire caught, trees burned, but they kept walking, spreading flames to other buildings, until half the block was on fire. Tim tried to put it out, realized too late he'd made things worse. The smoke got him. Too much, too fast, too thick. He collapsed in his parking lot, coughing, choking, dying while the forest walked over him, roots pressing his body into the scorched earth, beginning the process of absorption. I watched the Peterson family barricade themselves in their house. Bill and Janet Peterson, with their 3 kids, Emma, Jake, and little Sophie, who was only 6. They'd boarded up windows, reinforced doors, stockpiled supplies in their basement. They'd planned to wait it out, wait for help, wait for someone to figure out how to stop this. The house lasted 3 days. I watched through binoculars, watched their lights at night, watched them moving behind curtained windows, watched them trying to maintain normalcy. On the 3rd day, the roots found the foundation, broke through the basement walls. Vines came through cracks in the windows, through gaps in the boards, through any opening they could find. Thin green tendrils exploring, searching, infiltrating. The Petersons tried to escape. I saw them burst from the front door, running for their car in the driveway. But the driveway was already covered in roots, thick networks that had grown overnight, invisible under a thin layer of soil and grass. Bill's foot caught. He fell. Janet tried to help him up. The kids were screaming, frozen in fear. The vines reached them, wrapped around ankles, wrists, waists, pulled them down gently, almost tenderly, like the forest didn't want to hurt them, just wanted to reclaim them. They struggled, fought. But there were too many vines, too many roots, too much green reaching for them. I stopped watching after that, lowered the binoculars, turned away from the window. Couldn't witness it anymore. Couldn't watch good people die knowing I was safe in my tower, knowing I'd chosen to stay while others tried to flee, knowing that my broadcasts weren't helping anyone, just documenting the end. Katie found me sitting on the floor, head in my hands, trying not to think about the Peterson kids, about Sophie, who was 6 years old and used to call in to the morning show to request songs, about Emma, who was Lily's age, about Jake, who'd wanted to be a firefighter. Katie sat next to me, didn't say anything, just sat there. Sometimes that's all you can do. Just be present. Just remind someone they're not alone, even when being alone might be easier. Eventually, I got up, went back to the equipment, started broadcasting again. Because what else was there? Giving up meant letting the silence win, meant admitting the forests had taken everything, including our voices. And as long as I could still speak, still transmit, still reach someone somewhere, I had to keep going. By April 5th, Millbrook was gone, completely consumed. The buildings were still technically there, but you couldn't see them anymore. They were buried under vegetation, covered in vines and moss and plants I didn't have names for. The streets had vanished under grass and flowers. The town I'd lived in for 15 years, the place I'd called home, had become a forest in 2 weeks. The transformation was beautiful in a horrible way. Nature reclaiming what we'd taken, returning the land to what it had been before we cleared it and paved it and built on it. You could almost admire the efficiency if it wasn't erasing everything you knew. The radio tower was surrounded but untouched. The forest had advanced around it in a perfect circle, leaving maybe 50 feet of bare ground between the tree line and our building. Like a moat. Like the plants were deliberately avoiding us. Like they knew we were here and had decided to leave us for last. Katie thought maybe it was the electromagnetic fields from the broadcasting equipment. That something about the radio waves kept the plants at bay. She'd read studies about how electromagnetic radiation affected plant growth, though nothing that explained this. I thought maybe they just wanted us to keep broadcasting, wanted our voices to reach other humans, to spread fear, to break morale, to make the psychological impact worse. Or maybe I was giving them too much credit. Maybe they just hadn't gotten around to us yet. Maybe we were low priority. Maybe they'd come for us when they finished with everything else. Either way, we had a reprieve, and I was going to use it. I'd made contact with other broadcasters by then. Radio operators and ham radio enthusiasts and other DJs who'd stayed at their posts when everyone else fled. We formed an informal network, sharing information, warning each other about advancing forests, tracking patterns in the movements, just trying to maintain human contact in a world that was becoming increasingly inhuman. There was Margaret Yoon, broadcasting from Seattle. She'd been a classical music DJ for King FM for 30 years, playing Mozart and Beethoven and Brahms from a station in downtown. Elegant woman in her 60s who spoke 3 languages and had a voice like honey. She told me the forests had consumed most of Seattle, that buildings were collapsing under the weight of trees growing through them, that skyscrapers were becoming vertical forests, wrapped in vines that climbed toward the sky. She said people were trapped in pockets throughout the urban sprawl, isolated survivors in buildings surrounded by impenetrable green. They'd try to signal each other across the sea of vegetation, flashing lights at night, trying to coordinate, but the forest was too thick to cross. People were starving, running out of water, running out of hope. There was James Whitaker in Colorado, broadcasting from somewhere in the Rockies, talk radio host who'd spent years discussing conspiracy theories, government cover-ups, alien visitations, secret societies controlling the world. Now he was living through something that made his old topics seem quaint. He had a gravelly smoker's voice and a dark sense of humor that got darker as days went by. He said the Rocky Mountain forests were marching down from the peaks, consuming mountain towns one by one. Said the trees moved faster at high elevation. Said the thin air didn't slow them down at all. He'd been tracking their progress, plotting it on maps, calculating how long he had before they reached his location. He gave himself 2 weeks, was already planning his final broadcast, already writing his goodbye. There was Rachel Kim in Georgia, a journalist who'd converted her station to emergency broadcasts. Young, maybe 30, with the kind of fierce determination that makes great reporters. She'd been documenting everything, interviewing survivors, getting their stories recorded for posterity. She said someone needed to create a historical record. Someone needed to make sure future generations, if there were any, knew what happened. She reported that kudzu and other invasive species were leading the march in the south. Plants that had been brought to America decades ago had gotten out of control, were now weaponized, growing at impossible rates, covering entire towns overnight. She said it was like the invasives had been waiting, building networks, preparing for this moment when they'd finally overrun everything. And there was Thomas Keene, broadcasting from somewhere in the Midwest. Never got his exact location. He was cagey about it, said specific locations didn't matter anymore. Everywhere was falling. He'd been through something else before this. Some other disaster I got the sense had scarred him deeply. He didn't talk about it much, just focused on the present. Thomas had a way of describing things that made you feel the horror viscerally. He could paint a picture with words that was more effective than any video or photograph. He became a friend, as much as you can be friends with a voice on the radio you've never met in person. We'd talk for hours sometimes, comparing notes, sharing observations, just keeping each other sane. We shared information daily, tracked the spread across regions, tried to find patterns in what seemed like chaos. And patterns did emerge, though it took weeks to see them clearly. The forests were moving toward cities, toward anywhere humans had concentrated themselves. Rural areas were being consumed, but slowly. The main thrust of the advance was toward urban centers, like the forests knew where the biggest concentrations of humans were, and were prioritizing those targets, and they were coordinating. Different types of plants working together in ways that shouldn't be possible. Trees would advance first, breaking ground, creating pathways, establishing anchor points. Then smaller plants would follow, covering everything, filling gaps, transforming cleared land back into wilderness. Deciduous trees seemed to lead in some regions, conifers in others. Vines were always present, connecting things, binding structures together. Fungal networks were exploding, visible on the surface as mushrooms sprouting everywhere. Millions of fruiting bodies releasing spores that filled the air and made breathing difficult. It was organized. It was purposeful. It was strategic. Like an army with tactics and logistics and command structure, but distributed. No central leader we could find. Just the collective intelligence of billions of interconnected organisms acting as one. On April 10th, Margaret's broadcasts from Seattle stopped. Her last transmission came at 3:17 a.m. I was awake, monitoring frequencies like I did most nights now. Sleep had become difficult. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lily's face, heard her voice asking me to come with them, saw the Petersons being pulled down by vines, saw Tim Morrison dying in smoke, saw the town I loved being erased. Margaret's voice came through clearly at first. She was playing Debussy, Clair de Lune, beautiful and melancholy. The piece ended. There was a pause. Then Margaret spoke. "This is Margaret Yoon, broadcasting from King FM in Seattle. If you're listening, please know you're not alone. Whatever happens, wherever you are, you're not alone." Another pause. Then, "The trees have reached my building. I can hear them. Roots coming through the walls on the floors below. Vines breaking through the windows. I can hear them growing. Did you know plants make sounds when they grow? Too quiet for human ears normally, but there are so many here, growing so fast that I can hear them. It sounds like breathing or whispering. Millions of voices speaking in a language we were never meant to understand." Static crackled. I heard something in the background, a sound like wood cracking, like glass breaking. Margaret's breath, quick and scared. She said, "They're not just plants. There's something aware here, something conscious guiding them. I can feel it, like a presence. Like being watched by something vast and old and utterly alien to human experience. They're not attacking us. Not really. They're reclaiming, taking back what was always theirs. We were just temporary occupants, borrowers who forgot we'd someday have to pay back what we took." More sounds, closer. Margaret's voice stayed steady, but I could hear the fear underneath. She said, "To anyone still broadcasting, keep going. Be the voice, be the witness. Make sure someone knows we were here, that we lived, that we loved and created and dreamed. Don't let them take that. Don't let them erase our..." The transmission cut to static. Dead air. I called for her for hours, cycled through every frequency she used. Nothing. Just silence where her voice had been. That was when it really hit me, that this was the end. Not the end of Millbrook or Seattle or isolated communities. The end of humanity. The end of civilization. We were being systematically erased by something we'd underestimated for our entire existence. Trees. The background of human existence. The scenery we barely noticed. The resources we harvested without thought. They'd been conscious the whole time. Aware, connected. And we'd been waging a one-sided war against them for thousands of years without even realizing we were at war. Now they were fighting back, and we were losing. Badly. Katie found me at dawn, still sitting at the radio equipment, staring at the dead frequency where Margaret's voice should have been. She made coffee, strong and bitter, made me drink it, made me eat something, made me keep going because giving up wasn't an option yet. She said, "We can't save everyone, can't even save ourselves probably, but we can witness, we can document, we can make sure their deaths meant something. Margaret would want that, would want her story told." So I told it. Broadcast everything Margaret had said in her final transmission. Made sure everyone listening knew that Seattle had fallen, that a good woman had died bearing witness, that someone had been brave enough to describe what was happening, even as it consumed her. By April 15th, 3 weeks into the march, we were starting to understand the true scope. This wasn't limited to North America. Reports from every continent confirmed the same phenomenon. Trees walking, plants advancing, cities being consumed, humanity being pushed back into smaller and smaller pockets of survival. The Amazon was spreading at catastrophic rates. The rainforest that had been shrinking for decades, being cut down for farms and ranches and logging operations, was suddenly exploding outward. Growing back at impossible speeds and then continuing beyond its historical borders. Consuming Brazilian cities, crossing borders into neighboring countries, swallowing everything in its path. Vines as thick as tree trunks were pulling down buildings. Trees were growing through the streets of Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo, cracking foundations, toppling structures, transforming urban areas into jungle. The government had tried to evacuate major cities, tried to organize resistance. But you can't evacuate millions of people with no place to go. You can't fight an enemy that outnumbers you 1,000,000,000 to 1. In Europe, ancient forests thought to be stable and managed were mobilizing. The Black Forest in Germany was marching. The forests of Scandinavia were moving south. Even isolated groves and parks within cities were expanding, transforming urban areas into wilderness. In Asia, bamboo forests were advancing at terrifying speeds. Bamboo grows fast naturally, can gain several feet in a day under ideal conditions. But this was something else. Growing dozens of feet in hours. Consuming villages and towns before anyone could react. In Japan, cherry trees that had been cultivated for centuries were breaking free of their planted locations, joining wild forests in organized marches toward cities. Australia was losing ground to eucalyptus forests and the massive bushlands. The continent that had survived everything nature threw at it, droughts, fires, floods, was being overrun by its own native vegetation. Africa was seeing savannas transform, acacia trees walking in herds across plains where humans had built settlements. Antarctica was the only continent unaffected. No forests to march, just ice and wind and emptiness. Some people were talking about trying to reach it, escape to the one place plants couldn't follow. But how would you survive there? Even if you could get a ship through the Southern Ocean, even if you could establish a base, you'd freeze or starve, trading death by forest for death by ice. No good options, no real escape. Just the slow realization that humanity's time was ending, and there was nothing we could do to stop it. Governments tried to respond with force. Military units were deployed globally, tried to use explosives to create fire breaks, tried to burn advancing forests, tried to use chemical defoliants and herbicides on a massive scale. Some of it worked temporarily. You could slow the advance, destroy sections of forest, create temporary zones of safety, but it didn't stop anything. The plants kept coming, new growth replacing what was destroyed, and using chemicals or fire often triggered more aggressive responses. The forests seemed to learn from attacks, seemed to adapt. Second attempts at the same tactics were less effective. Third attempts usually failed completely. I heard reports of entire military units being overrun, Soldiers found wrapped in vines, pulled underground by roots that moved with purpose and intelligence. Crushed under falling trees that had deliberately toppled onto them, consumed by rapidly growing vegetation that sprouted from soil fertilized by their own blood. The forests were fighting back, not with weapons we understood, with patience, with overwhelming numbers, with the ability to regrow from any destruction. You can't win a war of attrition against an enemy that treats death as fertilizer. By April 20th, I'd lost contact with most of my radio network. The voices that had kept me anchored, kept me sane, kept me believing this was survivable, were disappearing one by one. James Whitaker's signal from Colorado went silent on April 17th. His last broadcast was his planned goodbye. He thanked everyone who'd listened to his show over the years, admitted that all his conspiracy theories had been wrong, said the real conspiracy was the one we'd never imagined, that the planet itself had been conscious and planning and we'd ignored every warning sign. He said, "I'm not running anymore. I'm 47 years old, been smoking for 30 years, couldn't outrun a forest if I tried. So I'm staying, going to broadcast until the power dies or they reach me, whichever comes first. Going to make them work for it. Going to go out talking, because that's what I do. It's been an honor, folks. See you on the other side." Then he played music, classic rock, Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd and The Doors, played for 6 hours straight, then his signal cut, gone. Rachel Kim's Georgia station stopped broadcasting on April 19th. No final goodbye, just suddenly absent. One day she was there, interviewing survivors, documenting stories. The next day, nothing. Just empty air where her voice should have been. I tried to reach her for days, cycled through every frequency, called her cell phone even though phone service was mostly dead, left messages she'd never hear. Eventually, I stopped calling, had to accept she was gone, had to add her name to the list of people this had taken. Others I'd been in contact with disappeared too. Small voices from isolated locations, amateur radio operators who'd maintained contact for weeks, suddenly going silent. Each loss hit harder than the last, each silence more profound. Until finally, there were only two voices left, mine and Thomas Keene's. Thomas was still transmitting from somewhere in the Midwest. He'd managed to stay ahead of the advance, kept moving, kept broadcasting from temporary locations. He had equipment he could set up quickly, run off generators or car batteries. Was mobile in a way I wasn't. We talked every night when I signed off my regular broadcasts. Would switch to a private frequency and just talk about what we were seeing, about what we'd lost, about whether any of this would matter to anyone who came after. Thomas said one night, "You know what keeps me going? Not hope of survival. That's gone. But the thought that maybe, centuries from now, when the forests have finished whatever they're doing, someone will find our recordings, will hear our voices, will know that humans existed, and we tried to understand what was happening even as it destroyed us. That's legacy. That's immortality. Not our bodies, but our voices preserved in electromagnetic waves and storage devices." I asked if he really thought anyone would find them, if there'd be anyone left to care. He said, "Probably not, but maybe, and maybe is enough to keep broadcasting." Thomas became my anchor, my proof that someone else was still out there, still resisting, still refusing to go quietly. I needed that, needed to know I wasn't the last voice screaming into the void. On April 23rd, something changed around our tower. The forests that had been maintaining that 50-foot perimeter started growing. Not advancing, but growing. Trees that had been mature, maybe 50 or 60 feet tall, were suddenly larger. Trunks widening, branches extending, new growth appearing overnight, and new plants were sprouting everywhere within the forest around us. Saplings shooting up, going from seed to 10-foot tall trees in a single day. Flowers blooming in impossible abundance, carpets of color spreading through the undergrowth, mushrooms everywhere, millions of fruiting bodies of every size and color, releasing spores that filled the air with visible clouds of reproductive material. The forest was becoming denser, thicker, more impenetrable, like it was consolidating, building up its mass, preparing for something. And we could hear it. At night, when we turned off the broadcasting equipment to save fuel, when the generators were quiet and the tower was silent, we could hear the forest. Not wind through leaves, not animals moving through undergrowth, not any natural sound. It sounded like breathing, like a giant organism inhaling and exhaling, or like whispering. Millions of voices speaking in unison, in a language that wasn't language, in sounds that carried meaning we couldn't decode but could feel. Katie recorded it, set up microphones outside the tower, captured hours of audio, played it back at different speeds, ran it through analysis software, tried to find patterns. Slowed down, it sounded almost musical. Harmonic patterns that repeated, rhythms that suggested structure, like a song or a chant or communication in a medium we didn't have the biology to fully process. Speeded up, it sounded like conversation, like the rapid-fire exchange of information, like the forest was talking to itself, coordinating, sharing data across the network, making decisions. Katie said one night, "What if it's not individual trees? What if the entire forest, every plant connected through the mycorrhizal network, is actually one organism, one massive distributed consciousness, and we've been killing parts of it, burning pieces of it, clear-cutting sections of its body for thousands of years? What if this is the moment it decided to fight back, the moment the pain became too much to ignore?" I didn't have an answer. Didn't know if forests could be conscious in any way we'd recognize. Didn't know if they could think or feel or decide anything. But watching trees walk and vines hunt and the coordinated advance of green across the planet, it was hard to deny that something intelligent was directing this. On April 28th, we got a visitor. First human contact besides each other in weeks. A woman emerged from the forest around 2 p.m., walked across the bare ground around our tower like she owned the place, knocked on the door. Katie and I stared at her through the window, trying to decide if this was real, if somehow the plants could mimic humans now, if this was a trap. But she was just a woman, maybe 40, exhausted, dirty, clothes torn, carrying a backpack that looked nearly empty. Alive. Human. We let her in after maybe 5 minutes of cautious observation. Gave her water first. She drank 3 bottles without stopping. Then food. Then a chance to rest. She sat in our break room and cried for 20 minutes. Just cried. Releasing weeks of terror and loss and the impossibility of still being alive. When she could talk, she told us her name was Elena Vasquez. She'd been a botanist at Portland State University before the forests marched. Had a PhD in plant ecology. Had spent her career studying how forests communicate and share resources. When the city started being consumed, when other people were running, she'd stayed behind to study what was happening. to understand. She'd been living in the ruins of Portland for over a month, hiding in buildings, observing from safe distances, taking notes, collecting samples, trying to document everything scientifically. She had notebooks full of observations, sketches, theories. The accumulated research of a dying field about the subject that was killing it. What Elena told us changed everything we thought we understood about what was happening. She said the plants weren't attacking, they were responding. For thousands of years, humanity had been waging war against forests, clear-cutting them for lumber and farmland, burning them to clear space, replacing them with monoculture crops and urban development. We'd reduced global forest coverage by massive percentages, had fragmented what remained, had isolated populations of trees that had once been connected, but they'd stayed connected through underground fungal networks that spanned continents, through chemical signals released into the air that could travel hundreds of miles, through means we still didn't fully understand, possibly quantum entanglement at the biological level, possibly something else entirely. And they'd been communicating, sharing information about threats, about damage, about the organisms that were destroying them, about us, creating a collective memory of humanity's crimes, building a consensus about what needed to happen. Elena said she'd found evidence that forests had been planning this for decades, that the mycelial networks had been growing more complex, that trees were producing more interconnected root systems, that chemical signaling between plants had increased exponentially. They'd been building the infrastructure for coordinated action, waiting for the right moment, waiting for some threshold to be crossed. She said, "We always thought we were at the top of the food chain, kings of the earth, but we never were. We were just the most aggressive, the most destructive, and the forests tolerated us as long as we weren't an existential threat. But we became one. We pushed too far, cut too much, destroyed too much too fast, and they reached a decision point. Us or them. They chose themselves." Katie asked the question I was thinking. Can we stop it? Is there any way to fight back? To negotiate? Elena laughed, bitter, exhausted, hopeless. Negotiate with a forest? How? They don't speak English, don't have diplomats, don't care about peace treaties or borders or human concepts of fairness. They're interested in one thing, survival. And they've decided that their survival requires our removal. We're being pruned, cut back, eliminated as a threat to the ecosystem. I asked, is there anywhere safe? Anywhere they can't reach us? Elena looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. Deserts, maybe, for a while. But deserts aren't as empty as people think. There are plants even there. Given time, given moisture from our bodies and settlements, they'll spread. Islands far from continental landmasses. Maybe. Antarctica. Definitely. But how do you survive there? How do you maintain a population on ice? She paused, took a breath, said, the truth is, there's nowhere safe long term. Plants have had hundreds of millions of years to evolve strategies for covering the earth. That's what they do. That's their purpose. To green every surface. To turn rock and soil into life. We were just in the way. A brief obstacle. And now they're removing the obstacle. Elena stayed with us for 3 days, helped with broadcasts, shared her research, explained the science behind what we were witnessing. She had a way of making the horror feel less personal. Like this wasn't an attack on humanity specifically, just the natural consequence of ecological imbalance correcting itself. Didn't make it hurt less, just made it make sense. On May 1st, she said she was leaving, going to try to reach the coast. Maybe find a boat. Maybe try to get to one of the Channel Islands off California. She'd heard rumors of survivor communities on offshore islands, though she admitted it was probably just wishful thinking. Katie asked if she wanted us to come with her. Elena looked at us for a long moment, considering, then said, "You're doing important work here, documenting this, broadcasting warnings and information. Someone needs to be the voice. Someone needs to bear witness. But you should know, this tower won't stay safe forever. The forests are leaving you alone for now, but that's temporary. They're letting you broadcast because it doesn't threaten them. The moment you become a problem, they'll come. And when they do, it'll be fast." She left at dawn on May the 2nd, walked west toward the coast, disappearing into the forest that had somehow decided to let her pass. We watched her go, never heard from her again. Don't know if she made it to the ocean or if the greens swallowed her somewhere along the way. Just another person taken by this, another name on an endless list. After she left, Katie and I didn't talk much. What was there to say? We both knew what was coming. Knew we were living on borrowed time. Knew that sooner or later, the forest would decide we weren't worth ignoring anymore. We just kept broadcasting, kept playing music, kept taking calls from anyone still able to reach us, kept being voices in the growing darkness. On May 5th, Thomas Keene's broadcasts changed. He was always calm, measured, analytical, but that day there was fear in his voice, raw terror he couldn't quite hide. He said the forests were doing something new in the Midwest, creating structures, weaving vines and branches together into walls and towers and geometric shapes that served no natural purpose, like architecture, like buildings, like the forests were constructing their own version of civilization in the spaces we'd left behind. He described massive lattices of interwoven vines, creating frameworks dozens of stories tall. Trees positioned at precise intervals, as if following some blueprint. Clearings being maintained in specific geometric patterns, circles, hexagons, arrangements that suggested mathematics. He said, "They're not just destroying our world, they're creating theirs, building something, cities maybe, or something that serves the same purpose for them. We're being replaced, not quickly, but thoroughly. Every trace of humanity scraped away and something else growing in its place. And there's nothing we can do. Nothing at all." His signal cut out on May 7th, middle of a broadcast. He'd been describing a structure he was observing through binoculars when his voice just stopped, mid-sentence. Gone. I called for him immediately, cycled through every frequency we used. Nothing. Just silence. Then, around midnight, his signal came back. But it wasn't Thomas speaking. It was that sound, that breathing, whispering sound the forest made, coming through his equipment, through his microphone, broadcasting on his frequency. Like the forest had reached his location and was using his station to transmit its presence. The sound lasted for 6 hours. Then silence. Permanent silence. Thomas was gone. My friend. My last connection to other survivors, the voice that had kept me believing this mattered. I was truly alone after that. Just me and Katie in our tower, surrounded by forest, broadcasting to an audience that was shrinking to nothing. On May 12th, the forest started testing our boundaries more aggressively. Vines would creep forward during the night, reaching across the bare ground toward the tower. We'd wake up and find them closer, always closer. During the day, they'd retreat slightly, But each night they came a little farther. We tried everything to stop them, pulled them up. They grew back overnight, burned them. New vines appeared in the scorched earth, poured salt to create a barrier. They found ways around it or absorbed the salt and kept growing. Nothing worked permanently. They just kept coming back, persistent and patient and inevitable. Katie said one night, "They're learning our patterns, testing our defenses, trying to figure out how to reach us without triggering whatever's kept them away so far. It's like they're studying us, learning from our reactions." On May 15th, we found mushrooms growing inside the tower, not near the doors or windows where spores might have drifted in, just appearing overnight in corners, along walls, in places they had no business being. Small white fungi with delicate caps, innocent looking, beautiful even. Katie wanted to remove them immediately, said they were the beginning of the invasion, that we needed to stop it before it spread. I told her to leave them. I had a theory forming, a dark, terrible theory I didn't want to be true. The mushrooms were part of the fungal network, the mycorrhizal system that connected plant roots underground, that allowed forests to share information and resources across miles. If mushrooms were fruiting inside our tower, that meant the network was already here, already beneath us, already all around us. We weren't in a safe zone. We were already surrounded, already penetrated, already claimed. The forest had been inside our perimeter the whole time. We'd been living in its territory for weeks, not realizing we were already caught. The only reason we were still alive was because it allowed us to be, because we served some purpose. Maybe our broadcasts helped break human morale in other locations. Maybe we were proof that resistance was futile. Maybe we were just not worth the energy it would take to kill us yet. I didn't share this theory with Katie immediately. Didn't want to take away the hope she was clinging to. The belief that we were protected somehow. That this tower was a sanctuary. Let her have that for a few more days. On May 18th, we lost the generator. It sputtered and died around 3 a.m. We'd been running it sparingly, only during broadcasts, and when we absolutely needed power, trying to conserve fuel. We still had maybe a month of fuel left in our storage tank. Should have been plenty. Katie went to investigate, found roots growing into the fuel tank. Thin, thread-like roots that had infiltrated the metal, found microscopic cracks and imperfections, wormed their way inside. They'd clogged the fuel lines, contaminated the diesel, made the generator inoperable. Sabotage. Deliberate, calculated sabotage. The forest had been inside our systems for who knows how long, growing through our infrastructure, learning how we operated. And when it decided to, it disabled us with surgical precision. We switched to battery power, had a bank of batteries charged and ready for emergencies, enough to keep broadcasting for maybe a week, maybe 10 days if we were extremely careful. After that, silence. Game over. Katie cried that night. First time I'd seen her break completely. She said, "We stayed for nothing. We're going to die here, and no one's even listening anymore. Every person with a radio is either dead or running. We're screaming into the void, broadcasting to emptiness. This was all for nothing." I held her, let her cry. Didn't tell her she was wrong because I thought she might be right. Maybe no one was listening. Maybe every other human on Earth was already dead or too busy surviving to care about two voices in Oregon. Maybe our broadcasts only mattered to us. Maybe that had to be enough. When she'd cried herself out, I said, "Someone might be listening. Somewhere. One person with a radio, hiding in a basement or fleeing through ruins or huddled on a mountain, and that person hears us and knows they're not alone. That's worth dying for. Being a voice in the darkness. Being proof that humans still existed, still fought, still refused to go quietly. Even if it's just one person, it's worth it. She looked at me with red eyes and asked, "You really believe that?" I said, "I have to." On May 20th, I made contact with a new voice. Unexpected, impossible. A woman broadcasting from San Francisco, or what was left of it. Her name was Sarah Chen. She was a tech worker who'd been trapped in her office building when the forests consumed the city. Found her way to the roof, had been surviving up there for weeks. Sarah became our new connection, our proof that others were still alive, still fighting, still broadcasting. We talked daily. She told me about what she was seeing in San Francisco. The forests were growing vertically now, she said. Trees climbing buildings like vines, using windows and ledges and architectural features as anchor points, creating vertical forests that turned skyscrapers into living structures. The skyline was transforming, glass and steel being wrapped in green. Nature consuming and remaking the monuments of human achievement. She said the forests had divided survivors into isolated pockets. People trapped in buildings surrounded by impenetrable green. They'd try to signal each other across the sea of vegetation, flashing lights at night, trying to coordinate, trying to plan rescues or escapes. But crossing the green was suicide. Anyone who tried disappeared, pulled down, absorbed, never seen again. Food was running out in the isolated pockets. People were starving. Some were trying to eat the plants, berries and mushrooms and leaves they found growing on their buildings. Most got sick. Some died horribly. A few found things that were safe, but it wasn't enough. You can't sustain a human population on foraged plants. Others were trying something else. Sarah said she'd seen it from her rooftop, seen people offering themselves to the forest, walking into the green voluntarily, speaking to the trees like they could negotiate, like they could make deals. Some of them never came back. Others emerged days later, changed. They'd stopped talking, stopped acting human, would just stand in place for hours, swaying like they were moved by a wind no one else could feel. Their eyes were open but empty, present but absent, bodies without minds, or minds that had been replaced by something else. Sarah said, "I think the forest is converting them, not killing them, but transforming them, making them part of itself. I don't know if they're still conscious in there, still aware, or if they're just absorbed. But they're not human anymore. They're something else, part of the network." I asked if she'd thought about doing that, about offering herself up. She was silent for a long time before answering. She said, "Every day, every hour. The hunger is getting bad. The isolation is worse. And there's this call. I don't know how else to describe it. When I look at the forest, I feel drawn to it, like it's inviting me. Promising things, peace, belonging, an end to loneliness. It's seductive, and I'm getting weaker, physically and mentally. I don't know how much longer I can resist." I told her to keep fighting, to hold on, to stay human as long as she could. But even as I said it, I wondered what the point was. Suffering to delay the inevitable? Or was there dignity in resisting even when resistance was futile? On May 25th, Katie got sick, started coughing in the morning. By afternoon, she had a fever. By evening, she could barely breathe. We thought maybe it was allergies at first. The air was thick with pollen and spores, clouds of reproductive material filling the atmosphere as plants bred at accelerated rates. But this was worse than allergies. The fever climbed. 102, 103, 104 degrees. I tried everything I could think of. Gave her water to keep her hydrated. Used cold compresses to bring the fever down. Went through our first aid supplies looking for anything that might help. But we didn't have real medicine. Didn't have antibiotics or antivirals or anything beyond basic over-the-counter stuff that was useless against whatever this was. Katie started hallucinating around midnight. Said she could hear voices. Said the forest was calling her name. Said it wanted her to come outside. That it had something important to show her. That she'd understand everything if she just came to see. I had to physically restrain her. Had to hold her down while she fought me. While she screamed that I didn't understand. That they were waiting for her. That she needed to go to them. Her strength was terrifying. Fever-fueled. Desperate. Eventually she exhausted herself. Collapsed back onto her cot. I stayed with her. Held her hand. Talked to her, even though I don't think she could hear me anymore. Told her about the first time we met, when she'd shown up for her internship interview wearing mismatched socks and charmed me with her enthusiasm. Told her about all the times she'd saved my ass when technology failed, or I'd deleted something important. Told her she was the best producer I'd ever worked with, and the best friend I'd had in years. She died on May 27th, quietly, in her sleep. I checked on her around 6 a.m. and she was just gone, still and cold. The fever had broken, but she hadn't survived it. There were mushrooms growing around her bedroll, small white fungi that hadn't been there when I'd checked on her at 4 a.m., like the forest had been waiting for her to die, like it had known. Like it could sense death and responded immediately, beginning the process of reclamation. I buried her outside the tower, dug a grave in the bare ground with tools from our storage room. Took me 4 hours. The earth was harder than I expected. Or maybe I was weaker than I thought. Or maybe I was just drawing it out, delaying the moment when I'd have to admit she was gone. I said words over her grave. Don't remember what. Something about how she was brave and kind and deserved better than this. How she'd stayed when she should have run. How she'd kept me sane when I was ready to give up. How I was sorry. So sorry for not sending her away when I had the chance. For being selfish enough to accept her loyalty even though it killed her. The mushrooms followed her body underground. I could see them spreading through the soil as I filled the grave, their mycelia reaching for her. By the time I'd finished covering her, there were already fruiting bodies sprouting from the disturbed earth. Katie was being absorbed, decomposed, broken down into components, becoming part of the network, part of the forest. Within weeks there'd be nothing left but nutrients feeding the trees. Within months, even her bones would be gone. I went back inside, turned on the equipment, broadcast the news of her death because someone needed to know, needed to understand that another good person was gone, that the forests had claimed someone who'd done nothing but try to help others. Then I played music, all of Katie's favorite songs, stuff I'd never have picked on my own. Pop songs and indie rock and weird electronic music that I didn't understand, but she loved. Played them for hours, my tribute to her, my goodbye. I was alone after that. Truly, completely alone. No Katie, no Thomas, no Margaret or James or Rachel, no network of voices, just me and Sarah's signal, and even that was getting weaker as her battery power failed. On May 30th, Sarah said goodbye. Her last broadcast. Said her power was almost gone. Said she was going to try to make it to the roof, see if maybe a helicopter would come, though we both knew no helicopters were flying anymore. The skies belonged to birds, and even they were dying as the changed atmosphere affected them. She thanked me for keeping her company, for being a voice, for making her feel less alone at the end. Said she was glad she'd found my frequency. Glad she'd gotten to talk to someone before the end. Her last words were, "Don't let them take you quietly, Daniel. Make them work for it. Make them remember that humans were here and we mattered. Even if no one's left to remember, say it anyway. Scream it into the void. We were here." Then her signal died. I called for her for hours, tried every frequency, got nothing back. I was the last voice, the last broadcaster, the last person, as far as I knew, still trying to warn humanity about what was happening. The last person stupid or stubborn enough to still believe it mattered. On June 1st, the vines reached the tower door, finally crossed that 50-foot barrier, started climbing the metal walls. I watched them from the windows, thick green ropes with leaves like hands, pulling themselves up the structure. They moved slowly but steadily, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they found a way inside. I barricaded the door, sealed the windows with whatever I could find. Used furniture, equipment, metal shelving. Knew it was futile. Knew the forest would find a way. But I needed time. Time to broadcast. Time to tell anyone still listening what I'd learned. Time to make this mean something. On June 3rd, I made my last broadcast to a general audience. Said everything I needed to say. Everything I'd been thinking for weeks, but hadn't wanted to voice because voicing it made it real. I said, "This is Daniel Cross, broadcasting from KMTN in Millbrook, Oregon. If you're hearing this, then you're probably going to die. We all are. The forests are taking the world back, and we can't stop them. We couldn't stop them even if we'd known this was coming, even if we'd prepared, even if we'd been ready. They're too many, too patient, too connected, and we're too few and too fragmented and too dependent on a world that no longer exists." I said, "But before you go, before the green takes you, remember that we were beautiful too. Humanity created art and music and love and kindness. We weren't just destroyers. We weren't just consumers. We built things. We dreamed. We reached for stars we never got to touch. We loved each other even when love made no logical sense. We were more than the worst things we did. And whatever comes after us, whatever grows in our place, I hope some echo of what we were survives in the soil." Then I played music. All the songs I'd played over 15 years of morning shows. Springsteen and Fleetwood Mac and Tom Petty and the Beatles and all the artists who'd made life a little more bearable. Every song that had meant something to someone. Every piece of beauty we'd created. I played them until my battery power was down to almost nothing. On June 4th, the vines broke through a window. The barricade held for a while, then gave way. Vines came pouring in like water, thick and green and unstoppable. I retreated to the broadcast room, sealed that door, knew I had maybe hours left. And I made this final recording, the one you're hearing now, because I needed to tell someone, anyone, everything. Needed to document what happened. Needed to explain why humanity lost. We lost because we forgot we were part of an ecosystem, not the masters of it. We treated the earth like it existed for our benefit, like we could take and never face consequences. We clear-cut forests and called it progress. We paved over wilderness and called it civilization. We poisoned soil and water and air and called it economic development. Maybe we could have kept doing that if the planet was just dead matter and unthinking organisms. But it wasn't. The forests were alive in ways we didn't understand, connected in ways we never imagined. And when we became a threat to their survival, they responded. Not with malice, not with hatred, just with the same indifferent necessity we'd shown them for thousands of years. We were a problem. They solved it. We're being pruned, cut back, allowed to go extinct so that the dominant form of life on this planet can continue. It's almost poetic, almost fair. We killed them without thinking. They're killing us the same way. The only difference is they'll survive it and we won't. The vines are under the door now. I can see them pushing through the cracks, reaching for me with delicate tendrils. They move like they're curious, like they want to understand what I am before they consume me. Or maybe I'm projecting. Maybe they don't think at all. Maybe they're just following programming, biological imperatives, instructions written into their DNA millions of years ago. I'm not afraid anymore, just tired, and maybe a little grateful. I got to be a voice until the end. Got to do the only thing I knew how to do. That's more than most people got. That's more than I deserved. If you're hearing this, then somehow my recording survived. Somehow someone found it after the forests moved on. Somehow humanity survived in some pocket somewhere, and you're listening to the voice of someone from before. From when there were still cities and roads and radio stations. From when humans still believed they mattered. I hope you're better than we were. I hope you learned. I hope you remember that this planet isn't yours. It's shared. It's borrowed. And if you forget that, if you take too much again, the forests will return. They'll march again. And next time, there might not be anyone left to warn you. My name is Daniel Cross. I was a radio DJ in a small town in Oregon. I played music and took calls and tried to make people's morning commutes a little better. I had a daughter named Lily who I loved more than anything, and I hope she survived somehow, somewhere. I had friends who died trying to document this, and I spent my last days broadcasting into emptiness because someone needed to be the voice. Someone needed to witness. And I'm about to become part of a forest. The vines are wrapping around my legs now. I can feel them. Not painful, just present. Like being held. Like being welcomed. They're gentle in a way I didn't expect. Patient. Like they have all the time in the world. Which I guess they do. It doesn't hurt. That's the strange part. It should hurt, but it doesn't. It feels peaceful, like falling asleep, like coming home after a long journey, like relief. I can hear them now. The whispering, the breathing, the voice of the forest. It's not words exactly, more like feeling, like understanding without language. And what I understand is that this isn't an ending. It's a transformation. I'll become part of something larger, something ancient, something that will outlast anything humanity ever built. I'm not afraid. Just grateful I got to matter. Grateful I got to be a voice. Grateful I got to tell this story. To Lily, if you're somehow still alive, I love you. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I chose the station over you. But I hope you understand why. I hope you know I was trying to help. And I hope you survived to rebuild something better than what we had. To Katie, thank you for staying. Thank you for being brave. Thank you for making the end bearable. To everyone who listened over the years. Thank you for letting me into your mornings. Thank you for the calls and the stories and the shared moments. You made my life meaningful, The forests are marching. The world is green, and we are being absorbed into something older and larger and more enduring than we ever were. Remember us. Remember that we were here. Remember that humans loved and created and dreamed of things we never reached. Remember that we tried to understand, even when understanding came too late. And if someday you find yourself surrounded by trees, if you hear them whispering in languages older than words, know that maybe some part of us is still there. Some echo of Daniel Cross, who played Springsteen and told bad jokes and loved his daughter more than life itself. Know that we didn't go quietly. We fought as long as we could. And when we couldn't fight anymore, we tried to understand. The vines are around my chest now, my arms, pulling me down gently, pulling me in. I'm setting this to auto-broadcast on a loop. When my battery dies, the message dies. But until then, anyone with a radio will hear this. Will hear the last voice of humanity. The forests aren't our enemy. We were never their enemy. Just obstacles. And now we're being cleared away. That's the cycle. That's nature. That's the way it was always going to end. I understand now. Why they marched. Why they took the world back. It was always theirs. We just borrowed it for a while. And now they're collecting what we owe them. With interest. It's beautiful. I can see it now. The network. All the connections. Everything linked. Everything one. Millions of minds. Billions. All thinking together. All living together. I'm not ending. I'm joining. Becoming part of. They're not cruel. They're just alive. Just surviving. Just doing what they were always meant to do. Take back the earth. Green every surface. Turn death into life. Turn us into home. They're bringing me home. I can feel Lily somehow. Katie, Thomas, Margaret, everyone who became part of this. We're all here, all connected, all part of the same thought, the same dream, the same vast consciousness. It's not death. It's transformation. It's beautiful. I'm sorry. I'm sorry we hurt you. I'm sorry we never listened. Thank you. Thank you for taking me in. Thank you for letting me belong